Good afternoon and welcome to In Focus. I'm Peter Laffin, editor of the In Focus section at the Washington Examiner, where we deliver deeper coverage into the political, cultural, and ideological issues shaping America. Our guest today is Madeline Fry Schultz. Madeline is the contributors editor here at the Examiner, and she's written a number of pieces of late on the topic of in vitro fertilization. Madeline, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, IVF, it's broadly popular. It has support from both major parties. President Donald Trump calls himself the father of IVF. What's the controversy surrounding it if everybody is for it?
So the way that IVF works is a woman's egg is taken, the man's sperm is taken. This is generally for couples who are struggling with infertility. This is a really big deal. It affects one in 10, 1 in 10 adults in the US of couples who are trying to get pregnant. So you take the egg and the sperm, you put them together to create an embryo outside of the uterus, and then you have it implanted so that the woman can get pregnant. And this helps because sometimes there are kind of genetic issues, and you can make sure that this is an embryo that you think is gonna last. And so this has helped a lot of couples have kids. There are tons of IVF kids in the US, but it also results in a lot of embryos that are not going to be used, are not currently being used. There are 1 million frozen embryos in the US right now, and that's not even to mention how many in other countries that are using this as well. So I think both parties see this as this really great way to help people who are struggling with infertility. And I think that could be true, but I mean, obviously there are a lot of kids who are born from it, but it comes with so much ethical baggage where you have all of these embryos that are being created. There are hundreds of thousands that are sort of floating around, not going to be used because what happens is you need to make a lot. A lot of them are not going to be viable. It's very expensive to do a round of IVF. So often what'll happen is you'll say, okay, let's take a handful of embryos. We'll put them in the woman's uterus and see what's going to happen. And then, a couple of them don't implant, and then maybe a couple of them do, but you didn't want to have a twin pregnancy because that's a high risk, or you didn't want to have a triplet pregnancy. So you end up aborting a couple of them so that it's just one embryo that develops throughout the pregnancy. So you have all of these issues coming up, not to mention even the issue of genetics, where people now you can kind of
Mm.
look at the embryos after they've been created and say, oh, I want the one with blue eyes, or I want the one with blonde hair. So I think people don't realize how complicated this actually is. It's not just
Mhm.
a simple way to help people who are struggling with infertility. It's very expensive. It's very time consuming, very hard on a woman's body, and it has all of this baggage.
So, what did we learn last week from the announcement at the White House?
So Trump, who has called himself the father of IVF, he has very little understanding of, I think, the issues surrounding IVF and the way that a lot of conservatives are thinking about it. Because someone asked him, what would you say to pro-lifers who are uncomfortable with you encouraging IVF through the administration? And he said, pro-life? I think this is very pro-life. You can't get more pro-life than this. Typical Trump quote. But it's not really in the understanding of their pro-lifers believe that life begins at conception. So all of these embryos that are being discarded through IVF, that are just kind of sitting in limbo, this is a big human rights issue. And this is not something that we can just push aside and say, well, you were able to have a kid, and now we don't really care about all these embryos that are just sitting around. And we even had the Alabama Supreme Court rule that embryos are people. And what happened is it didn't come up because pro-lifers were like, we're going to make this an issue. There were couples who had their embryos frozen at an Alabama IVF clinic. Someone walked into a freezer, grabbed some of the embryos, burned their hand because it was so cold, dropped them,
Wow.
and one of the couples filed a wrongful death of a minor lawsuit. And so the question that then went to the Alabama Supreme Court is, can you sue under this statute, assuming that an embryo is a minor, has the protections of a child, of a human? And the Alabama Supreme Court ruled yes.
That's remarkable. Um, So you write in the piece, I think you say it very well, to Trump, it's just a numbers game. Maybe if you could unpack that for us a little bit.
Yeah, I think you see this in the language of him saying, I'm the father of IVF. He wants to be, he also has talked about pronatalism and wanting everyone to have babies. Like he just wants this like big, beautiful pronatalist movement where everyone's just having kids. And that's great. And I love that. I think it would be great if everyone who wants to have a kid could have a kid. But he's not really thinking about, again, the ethical implications of this. To him, it's just how many kids can be born that weren't going to be born
Right.
otherwise? How can we just boost those numbers of more children born in the U.S.? And I think that is an important question, and there are ways to do that, lots of different ways to do that. And there are people in his administration who are working on, various different avenues that can help people with infertility. But I think for Trump, it's just like when people think about couples who are struggling with infertility, I think IVF is kind of the first thing that comes to mind. And I had this when with my doctor when I had three miscarriages. They mentioned to me, well, why don't you try IVF? It's just like that top line, this is such a big industry. Everybody knows about it. Everyone, most people are familiar with it and think positively of it. So, why not make it cheaper? Why not make it more accessible? I think is the question that people are asking.
The pro-life movement, as you mentioned, they broadly oppose it because it does destroy a human embryo, or at least the process normally destroys many human embryos or keeps them inevitably frozen. But the pro-life lobby doesn't seem to have much of a voice with this administration or on this issue. Is that your sense of it?
Absolutely. I think that Trump got elected with the votes of pro-lifers. And now he's doesn't really care so much about what they have to say. And I think there are definitely pro-life influences in the administration that softened his IVF announcement. So what he announced recently was basically that he was going to lower the prices of drugs that women need to take during the process. He reached an agreement with a drug maker. And he's encouraging companies to offer plans that will cover IVF. So very much more muted than what he had originally promised, which
Mhm.
was I'm going to make IVF free for everybody. So I think that that is probably because of the work of pro-lifers who are in the administration that they, told him, we don't want you to be mandating that insurance covers IVF. We don't want to make this something that taxpayers are having to pay for because taxpayers are already in other avenues having to pay for abortion. This is already an issue that pro-lifers are working on. So I think that it did become more muted because of that. But I think pro-lifers there's still something to critique there, which is that he is promoting IVF, not raising some of the issues with it. But some pro-life groups I think are a little afraid to go
Mhm.
too hard. They don't want to mess up their relationship with him or maybe leverage that they hope to have. So
Or
a lot
think
of
they
them,
have.
yeah, well, so a lot of them were just saying, oh, that's, not our favorite, but it's okay. They just kind of had these muted responses to his IVF
Right.
action, even though from a pro-life perspective, it was not great.
Well, you have to think of this combined with the announcement of a generic mifepristone being approved a couple weeks ago. The Trump administration defending mifepristone, that's the abortion pill, in court. The pro-life lobby doesn't seem to have a lot of sway over this president, and so what that makes me think going forward, whoever the nominee is in 2028 for the Republican Party going forward in general, does it matter in this political climate whether or not Republican candidates actually have the backing of the pro-life community, the pro-life movement anymore? Have they been knocked down so much that they just can't seem to land any blows, take any scalps when the Republican politicians cross their agenda?
I think a lot of the problem with this actually comes back to voters who are not that pro-life, unfortunately. Most people have a fairly uh, sort of they think, maybe 12 weeks is too much. Once you can see that the fetus looks like a baby, that's where we draw the line. But you don't have a lot of people that are so pro-life that they're really thinking about even an embryo that's not inside his or her mother's womb is worthy of protection. That's kind of an extreme position. It's my position. I think that it's important that we need to protect these embryos, that they are human lives. But in the sense of our politics, it is kind of an extreme way to think. And so I think before politicians are going to really respond to this, I think the public needs to shift on it, because the pro-life groups are feeling the issues that they're now focusing on are kind of feeling more fringe. I think
Hmm.
Trump feels like he did his job with Roe v. Wade, getting it overturned,
Hmm.
nominating his Supreme Court justices. And that was something he was rightly praised for. But I think he thinks, okay, now and he doesn't want to support a national abortion ban. He thinks I've sent it back to the states. I've
Hmm.
kind of done my duty. This isn't really my problem anymore. And I think that's where pro-lifers are struggling, because maybe it is something more that they need to focus on at a state level rather than a national level,
Hmm.
and just kind of bringing this back into the conversation too.
Yeah, winning hearts and minds. And one potential way to do that is to offer alternatives. You write this other piece, you wrote another In Focus 2 weeks ago, talking about dueling congressional hearings over reproductive health. Tell us a bit about what those were like.
Yeah, so there's one on IVF, which we've been talking about. And their mission, I think, is to get more funding for IVF, more awareness, kind of make this a bigger option for a lot of women. And then the other hearing that was going on that same day is about this thing called restorative reproductive medicine, or RRM. And this is sort of an alternative to IVF. It's a categorically different thing because it doesn't, you're not working with embryos outside of the mother's womb. This is very much something that a lot of pro-lifers like to pursue. It's popular with Catholics. And the idea is that instead of doing these kind of technological interventions where you're working with the embryo itself, you are going back and looking at the woman's health and looking at the man's health and trying to figure out where is this all coming from, and trying to treat that. So it's kind of this big picture thing. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine says about their approach that unlike conventional approaches that use treatments that suppress normal physiology to deal with dysfunction, RRM seeks to work with the body, treating reproductive abnormalities, not by bypassing the body's processes, but by diagnosing, understanding, and addressing underlying health concerns.
Okay. Well, Madeline, thank you so much for being with us today and for your incredibly deep and thoughtful coverage of this issue. And I hope to have you back soon.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me on.
Bye bye.